everybody. You know my name, Christoph Stückelberger. I'm the director and founder of Progressive.net. And I welcome you to this second workshop session this morning, before we then go back to the plenary in the afternoon. And you have seen and selected the topic social media for participation and equal access to information. Let me give a few introductory words before we come to the presentations and then the discussion. The social media, or the media in general, of course, are an important part of the question of equality. Equality in the access to information. And we all know that in an information society, as it's called today, access to information is key. It's even key not only for education, it's key for survival. Access to food, access to money, to capital, access to water, access to good weather for the farmers, whatever. Everything depends somehow on access to information. And Progressive.net is also especially committed to that. You know that we have an online library on ethics, an online library on theology and ecumenism, and an online library on African law with the African Innovation Foundation. With totally 1.4 million documents as a contribution to the access to information. We are also involved in the BISIS project, World Summit for Information Society. I think maybe Workgroup will say more about that also. That's the context. How can social media, it's now more on social media than media and communication in general, how can they contribute to equality in society? And where maybe they contribute to inequality? We will hear from the panelists. So we will have 4 panelists. The first one, which is on the Philippi, is a key person in that subject as the program director of the World Association of Christian Communication, and they've worked since 20 years on this subject. And we will publish also a book about contributions, because he was involved in Progressive.net Global Ethics Forum 2011, 2012, 2014, and will be in that sense part of us. But he cannot, for technical reasons, be connected via Skype as it was planned, because he is outside in a location where it's difficult to do that. But I'm happy to welcome Sukumar Muralidharan, correct?
Muralidharan, yes.
More or less. Journalist and fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study. He's known in India, and we are happy to have a journalist, because of course you are daily in this business. Diana Joseph, you already heard yesterday with this innovative Broadway Foundation, and partner of this conference. Zhao from China Radio International. We are very happy to have China here on the board, and to listen to the role of media and social media from your perspective. And then we have Walter Fust, president of Progressive.net, who I must say is one of the persons who is really very committed to that question, because since a long time, and if I may introduce you as one of the key persons of this World Information Society process in 2003, 10 years ago, where Switzerland hosted the conference and you were in the core seat, so to say, for this conference. But here we mentioned another function, United Nations Broadband Commission. He will say more what it is, and we have seen in the introduction of Info the meaning of broadband for the access to information. You have the floor, Sukumar, for your first short introduction.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible from the room. So, okay, there was a question posed how is digital technology changing the way media can influence the achievement of different developmental goals? Now, I'm trying to address that question. And, my basic problem here is that developmental goals are not very clearly understood. We're in the grip of what is called the theology of growth, growthmanship. GDP growth is what matters. Development will look after itself. Distributive justice will follow as a consequence of aggregate economic growth. Now, this I think is a seriously flawed premise because I don't believe that that is the case. If you look at all of economic history, since the dawn of the modern industrial age, that's not been the case at all. What we need are institutions that will ensure distributive justice. So it's not just a market that counts. You need to have other kinds of institutions. You need to have trade unions to ensure a fair wage bargaining. You need to have consumer associations. You need to have ombudsman for public services. You need to have all these protected by legislation and active and live parts of civil society. Otherwise, there is no assurance of distributive justice at all. So that is my basic premise. And if you look at the last 2-3 decades of globalization, for India it's a 2-decade long experience in countering globalization. For other economies, Latin America, Africa, so on, through probably 3 decades. Early 80s is when we firmly take the current regime of globalization form. The theology is that is the theology of trickle down. Trickle down is seemingly benign sounding notion, but I think it's a really noxious kind of concept because it kind of is based on the belief that the poor are condemned to live off the crumbs that the rich might trickle down off the tables of the rich. And I think the denial of agency to the poor is intrinsic to this concept of trickle down. Not just the poor, whoever is without means. It's only the top 10 percentile that creates the momentum of history under this view. The other 90 percentiles are condemned to be at the receiving end of the benign attention of the top 10%. That is the implicit assumption here. So there's a denial of agency to 90% of the population. And that goes along with a denial of voice. And that's where I come to the role of the media. And when I look at the media today, just of course we have to consider before we go to social media, we have to look at the traditional media. How is the traditional media organized? And traditional media is organized as an industrial sector. The media is an industrial product, media output. Information is an industrial product, produced for profit. It's not a public good. It is incidentally a public good, but the principal motive for producing information through commercial media is profit. And it is, in the classical, the most cynical understanding of this is Lord Thompson's statement back in the 1930s that, or news, that's just what fills in the space between the ads. Now that logic, unfortunately, has become progressively more and more deeply embedded in the function of the media. Recently, you had the vice chairman of the largest media group in India, which has got interest across the spectrum, from print to broadcast to online. Times Group is what I'm talking about. In an interview with the New Yorker magazine, saying that we are in the advertising business, we are not in the news business. And the logic is very clear, and he is perfectly justified in saying it because 85%, 90% of the revenues of the company come from advertisements. Just 10% come from the audience. So the entire content is tailored to the requirements of the advertiser. The advertisers, by definition, look targeting the high purchasing power demographic strata. So so the content becomes this whole thing about feel good, India shining, and so on and so forth. The interests of the probably 90% are left out of the reckoning. The long-term promise held out to them is that you can seek to emulate the top 10%. Those who can't don't matter anyway. They're not going to read their newspapers. They're not part of the elite discourse. They won't create the national debate. Now, how does social media alter that scenario? Social media, in a sense, imports these disparities from the traditional media because the digital divide, what's called the digital divide, there is a barrier to entry. You need to have a certain access the resources to gain entry into the domain. But still, there has been great progress. And if you look at the figures for India, the number of internet users is a relatively small number at this moment, 137 million. That's a very broad definition. Whoever goes to internet cafe is caught in that net. The number of broadband connections, which is the more key indicator, is just 15 million. If you consider that each broadband connection may have 5-6 users, that's still a very, very small number for this country, 1.2 billion people. And smartphone population is 100 million. That is where the future seems to lie, the use of the potential of social media. And mobile phone population is 1 billion, but most of that is postpaid. And, you don't get the full benefit, the full menu of choices available. But key difference here is that as against discrete points of origin of the information flow in traditional media, and the journalist as a gatekeeper, so a key function there is played by the journalist, and the journalists in this country, I belong to that tribe, are among the least diverse in terms of social origin. We all come from a particular strata. It's a segmented population to begin with, because there's a linguistic segmentation. The English-speaking journalist is right at the top, the highest paid, the highest audience, the highest audience value. The total reach of the English language media is about 50 million in this country. Print English language, 50 million, compared to about 300 million, 400 million the Hindi language media, which is, but the Hindi language journalist is just nowhere in the social hierarchy. He's very much a lower caste being. But in terms of social origins, what we find is that there is a great tendency towards homogenization. That they all come from the same similar strata, they all speak the same language, they all watch the same cricket matches, they all support the same football clubs, they watch the same movies. So there's a tendency towards groupthink. And groupthink it serves the needs of the advertisers, because the advertisers want the news content to be within a very, very manageable spectrum. There should not be any serious divergences from that, within that. But it is an enemy of good journalism. Groupthink is an enemy of good journalism, because we leave out very large parts of the canvas that are of interest to the larger population. So social media alters that, in that you have multiple points of origin of the information, and that each person is potentially a newsmaker, a media maker. Just like you have the famous case of the fishermen of Kerala, who got access to mobile phones and became price makers rather than price takers, because they could decide which market they took their cash to. As they approached the shore, they could make a few calls and decide which. The story is a little complicated. I mean, it's not as feel-good a story as that, but that is the beginning of the story. If you're interested, you can develop the sequel to that story later. So in that sense, the social media makes each person a media maker. You can be a point of origin of news. But do you have absolute freedom to propagate your opinion, your point of view? Now remember, that is the promise that we have under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says that every individual is free to voice his opinion across national frontiers, across all media. That is a promise. The promise has been a very distant one, but social media makes that potentially reachable. But what do we have to overcome? First, we have to overcome the problems of access, which is an economic problem, and an affordability problem. Now, if you have a major program of infrastructure building, I'm sure that this problem can be at least halfway addressed. And the second problem is that of legal framework. In the last 3-4 years, you've seen a number of instances of people who've been using social media to put across points of view. Many of them legitimate points of view, which have a place in national discourse, but are not, but we, the elite, are not used to listening to hearing those voices. You had cases of them being slapped with legal cases, sedition charges, various kinds of, are the most draconian clauses of the law. You have an act called the Information Technology Act, which is amended. Section 66 makes it cognizable offense to create annoyance. So, it's a very, very broad definition. And it is even more restrictive than the free speech rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution, Article 19 of the Constitution. Article 19 of the Constitution, there are only 6-7 grounds on which the free speech right can be restricted. But under 66A of the Information Technology Act, you have a very broad definition, creating annoyance and so on and so forth. So we need to work on reducing the scope for the misuse of the law. Infrastructure is the first item on the agenda. Second is reducing the scope for misuse of the law, for clear definitions of what constitutes a free speech right, for a more kind of open dialogical approach to this issue, less of a confrontational issue. Now, we have a culture of offense in this country. We're quick to take offense. Everybody says something, whether it's about Chhatrapati Shivaji in Bombay, or about somebody depicts God from the Hindu pantheon in a particular way. His paintings are burned, his galleries intact, raised to the ground. We have cultural offense. We've got to tone down that cultural offense and work towards a proper definition of this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very insightful first contribution from a journalist side with a relationship to the new tendencies of social media. We turn to China. Radio International.
China Radio International.
Yes, so you may say something about it and your point of view on that.
Okay, and thank you very much for ladies and gentlemen to come here for our panel discussion. And firstly, I want to say that I like this theme of this conference, equal in an unequal world, very much, because I still remember when I was a little girl, my father told me, men were born equal, but some are more equal than others. And today I saw, I got this theme of this conference. It's a reflection of that. And transparency, I think, is a very important element for us here to seek equality in an unequal world. And access to information is very important. And I do agree with my colleague or other panelists here to say that access to information is not only needs the help or contribution from the traditional media, but also the social media today. Especially, I think traditional media, no matter it's commercial or public or state-run media, they have, all of them have the interest behind them. If it's commercial, it has the interest of their boss, and if it's a state-run, it has interest from the government. Yeah, so that's why I think social media's role in today's China is quite important, and it's really a very complementary plus for the traditional media. Social media channels, here I want to share with you some cases or examples of how social media play their role in today's Chinese society. Social media channels continue to grow in popularity across China. And for a country with over 1.3 billion people, and use of social media is a way for individuals and businesses to communicate. China's population has regularly adopted, a lot of people adopted mobile internet use as well, with more than 450 million citizens accessing the net via smartphones or other wireless devices, this is according to China Internet Network Information Center. And I want to give you share with you some examples of how the China social media platform Weibo, is the China's equivalent of Twitter, has brought transparency to China. And I can reel off example after example of Weibo acting for equal access of information and also as a democratizing force here in China. It's a check and balance in society, which makes Chinese society more equal access to information and much better. Before, if anything happens, any accident or disaster, the information can be withheld or contaminated by media control. but now it's impossible almost to withhold information. There are many recent incidents of Weibo driving national conversation. For instance, rising attention to the terrible Beijing air quality, the smog, the PM 2.5, which has played out in public over the past 2 years, started actually with the US Embassy publishing pollution measurements on its official Weibo account initially. And at first, the government said this is wrong. And then the government said it would take years to report. But now they say they would start to report. And just a few days ago, the government just published that there are 161 cities there in China begin to publish their environmental pollution measures and data. This actually pushed the entire environmental issues in China, and now it's become one of the highest priorities for local government, both the local government and central government. And in another example, a woman started a Weibo account under the name Guo Meimei, was account of her luxury lifestyle, while saying that she worked for the Red Cross at the time. While the users tend to be fake, it set up a nationwide discussion and review of charity organizations. I think the government had held strict review of charities and made them more transparent. For a period of time of 6 months, there was a very low point where charity organizations couldn't get fundraising because people thought it was not right to give these people funding. So, and another example I want to give or share with you is a open trial of a senior politician in China. And actually the local courthouse opened its own official Weibo account, effectively disseminating pictures, courtroom transcripts, and other relevant information to hundreds of thousands of watchers, and moved to release up-to-date information on the traditional on Weibo was very significant in showing the public that they have the right to know. So I think the social media there in China is a very important role to push the government to achieve good governance. And it has also played a quite important role in legal cases and the government's anti-corruption campaign. And I think for this Twitter-like social media in China, it has not only changed public discussion, but also government itself. There is no way of going back, and officials and government have to react to the public opinions. And also, I think from my perspective of the media industry, in China, 70% of breaking news in China is not reported on Weibo first. So I think the biggest impact social media has brought today is the impact on the media itself. The impact on society is indirect, but the impact on media is direct. And also, I feel very important and interesting to share with you is what are the generic principles that should provide the ethical platform for citizen journalism and other forms of social media. I think the principle guiding social media should be universal and should transcend the national boundaries. If you, to me, accuracy comes first. You want to spread accurate information, and then attribution comes second. If you didn't witness something that you are spreading, you should cite the source so people can assess its reliability by themselves. And fairness is the third. You shouldn't manipulate information or images to change their context or meaning for personal or commercial or political reasons. That's all.
Thank you very much for this very precise and at the same time inspiring examples that you bring, and then some concrete conclusions, like the biggest impact is on the media, which is an interesting analysis of your context. We'll come back to these things. Just by the way, also for all of you, the goal of all these workshops is that at the end we also have some few recommendations or outcomes that will be reported in the plenary in the afternoon. So the panelists, as you all, if you're listening or while listening, reflect on what would be a key outcome of this workshop in terms of what do we want to say on the role of social media and equality. Diana, you have the word. Not from an Indian perspective, but on a perspective of your own experience in the quarter.
Right. As Walter mentioned, and you've seen our work in the last one day, I just want to bring to this table one clear thinking that we believe at Portrait Foundation, that we are creating a society that is more free-thinking. We are actually in the process of creating a society that is more, more free to express and free to imbibe knowledge. And with that as a responsibility on the shoulders of the, I would say, people who have access to information and social media platforms, there comes the factor of responsibility. That whatever we put out, whatever we share, whatever we try and communicate has some kind of authentication. My reference points to all the discussions here, though you discuss policy at some level, for me it is more on the lines of how social media has been affecting participation. Access to social media is a huge discussion, debate topic, but participation, how it enables participation and where is the hindrance for participation. What we have seen over time, we work in the development sector. We work with one of the largest projects in the country working around inclusion of children with disabilities into mainstream education. We have noticed that we set out initially to create a model for the state government to replicate this in other states. And being new players on the block, because the disability sector is over 30-40 years old, Don is there sitting, who have done work in disability, and we were coming like new kids on the block with some kind of a model we think would be a solution to the country. And we face this problem of not being accepted. But we use the tool, the social media tool, to actually let the message go out. And we've done 3 years of the phase 1. It's been successful. Our numbers have actually been very alarming. The state government is also sitting up and watching what they did right. We've been able to include over 5,000 children into the system. Positive point of our working in the space of social media is we realize that it's a roomless communication. There's no investment for an office. We really don't have a physical space. We're very internet present. We're virtual in that sense. So this is the way forward for development. This is the way forward for participation. But when it comes to the point of access, we are also in the same space when we're fighting for access to information. People with disabilities have difficulty in access to information on the internet. All websites are not access friendly. So there are those dimensions that we want to tackle when it comes to access to information in the social media space. So there is a request from a national perspective or an international body or people who are actually taking measures to ensure there's access to information, that these points get into it, that people on the sidelines with disability, people on the sidelines with language issues, have access to the information that's present in the social media space, in language, in access and content that is accessible. So these are the larger dimensions of the social media, what do you say, good and bad sides, but I think these all need to be brought to the table, considering the various societies or stakeholders who will be using this medium.
Thank you very much, Diana. And we already heard yesterday, interesting interesting examples of what we are doing, and even with our cooperation, we have seen the outcome. Thank you so much. Well, the first you are the one among us who have most probably the longest record in terms of decades dealing with this question and the global outreach and overview, sitting in a UN body.
Please don't disclose my age. I would structure my thoughts in 3 points. First, about the social media per se. Second, the issue of participation, and the third, related to equal access. Now, what is the definition of social media? The expression came up when Facebook was launched, and then with Twitter, partly with Flickr. But today, social media is all kind of ICT-related communication means and tools that offer many-to-many communication. So that implies a whole question of literacy. How do people become social media literate? It's not just falling from heaven. Even in so-called countries with high computer rates, many people, different generations, they are not computer literate, nor are they literate how to use the social media. And when we speak about social media and participation, we certainly come back to that. The second point is the whole issue of identity. That means reality and virtuality. The young people have lived very quickly to have two identities. The real identity, the person they are, but also the virtual identity. But simply the fact that in the virtual space, very often they use real facts and real images, some get disturbed to know and differentiate what is reality and what is virtuality. And that leads me to the concept of space and place. I mean, what you act in a local space through those medias, that's fine, that's what people do. But it's out in space, and space will always remember. So people should watch what language they use, not whether English or Hindi or German or French, but the words and the way they use the language. Because it can be of coincidence that maybe the boss or somebody else is reading what you write in those medias. Because you are responsible for what you do. But with the virtual identity, people hide behind the virtual identity. Whereas in the media, in other medias, you have editorial responsibility and you have the name of the journalist. So it's a different form of accountability. And that accountability relates in a way or another to the personal identity. And that is very often not disclosed in using the social media. But we also come to the point, what are the ethics of social media? What are the code of conducts to really behave properly in those social medias? And that is also where we place from Club Ethics this leaflet, 10 points of ethics and ICTs. Maybe you have heard or you have seen or you have written.
It is displayed on the place downstairs.
But let me also come to this kind of new behavior to criticize. I had once a professor in my youth who told me about the ethics of criticism. he said, you should not criticize if at least you don't have your own opinion to do better. And I think it's somewhat the revival of what we should reconsider. It's so easy to criticize, so easy, but are you responsible for what you are telling those people, or is it just a burst out of your emotions, or is it really of substance? Is it responsible what you do? So the ethics of social media, I think, is a subject we really should work on. Let me go to the forms of participation. I mean, obviously you have virtual spaces offered through the social medias, but you have also a lot of other opportunities. I remember a couple of years ago when the prize winner at the NASCOM meeting here in Mumbai was the SMS newsletter to the villages, in the villages, as a means to communicate, low cost. It was celebrated as a fantastic innovation. Today, in many countries, it is very much common. But I think the whole issue is how to set up those communities in the medias, if there want to be communities in social medias when it comes to local politics. Or is just each one celebrating himself, exposing himself, attacking another individual? The influence on politicians is considerable, and the party affiliation will certainly go further beyond, further back, and the individual will be probably more in the focus. But when it comes to issues, there are forms of, we call that e-government or e-governance, these platforms, for example, to collect opinions of people. It is done in many countries. In Africa, there are amazing software development, South Africa, Uganda. In Europe, you have such platforms to inquire, to place your inquiries, your appraisals, people's opinion to be expressed on such platforms. But the whole issue is then still who is managing that virtual space for a local community or for a district or a group of villages or others. If there is no moderator around for a virtual space to manage that, it's probably not as useful or as efficient as many people think. The third point, we have heard about the importance of affordability to access. Technically, the access is probably the trend is in the years to come that access will be free, but the use of certain products will be charged in a way or another. That creates then probably another kind of inequality. You solve one, but you create probably another one. But the whole issue of affordability remain and will remain there because it's a material issue. But let me point one experience. I mean, when you look at, even in the Broadband Commission or elsewhere, there are many governments who cannot yet cope with this many-to-many, with this degree of liberty to act in the whole space. And politics, even big companies, they have a problem with the so-called virtual marketing, because normally they did the normal marketing one-to-many, and now there are many feedbacks coming back, and many companies don't know how to react. They are not anymore alone in doing their marketing efforts, but it's becoming an interactive issue. And then let me also point an issue here. Maybe it's politically not correct, but these authorities now created in a number of countries the so-called counter-information authorities, doing nothing else than disseminating wrong information. That is not helping transparency all that much. We should actually need. And those are doing it, even so they are normally government bodies, they are doing it without any editorial responsibility at all. And the way it is done is really disturbing. So the whole issue is far beyond the cybersecurity. It's becoming a big ethical issue for governments, how they really manage information and how they control those bodies and entities who do produce counter-information to disturb the well-being or well-going of certain activities. And that is a point which for me is not only a risk, but it is a problem we have to look at. We have to challenge governments, because if governments are afraid of empowered people, and access to information is a vehicle to empower people, and information of a certain validity over time becomes knowledge, and knowledge grows the more you use it and the more you share it. And if governments are afraid of doing that and allowing that, then probably they are in a certain trouble, because you have heard from our colleague from China, in nowadays world it is merely, maybe technically still feasible for governments to intervene, but the way how people can counter those interventions by using different virtual identities, by using different telecommunication flows, is out of control. So the question is really, what are those principles and standards in social media governance, in internet governance? And those are not yet found. There is a dispute whether it should be among countries, governments. Definitely they have a big say, but it's also disputed whether the identities people have in the social medias, is it appropriate that it is governed by an American foundation, or is it really not appropriate to be governed by another entity? There are no solutions yet in sight. A last word with regard to broadband. We were asked by Ban Ki-moon to prove the economic value of the use of broadband to enhance quicker reaching of sustainable development goals. And the reports are out there for those who are interested in what the Broadband Commission is doing, chaired by Carlos Slim from Mexico and from the President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. We were about 20 commissioners at the beginning, now we are about 60. There are different working groups. But if you go to Google or www.broadbandcommission.org, you will find more information.
Thank you very much for this, on one hand, practical but also very conceptual insights and challenging questions about ethics of information society and responsibilities of the users and the different stakeholders. Listening to the four panelists, I see different sets of questions. One is the terminology, as you said, but also others. How do we call a child? Social media is the most used term even in our workshop, but what does it tell? Is it just a nice phrase? Because listening to you, you are explicitly or less explicitly saying, yeah, is it really social media, or is it the citizen media, or is it mass media, if you say it's mass-to-mass communications in a way, Is it then what is the difference to other mass media, so to say? So all about terminology, which is not a philosophical question, but a question of self-understanding. A second question I have seen, or set of questions, is the ethics of three types of actors. The users, in terms of self-responsibility, what is their responsibility? The second is the owners. We have not yet heard about it. You said all media have their interests behind. So you are questioning or asking this question, what is the interest also behind social media? And then the governments as regulators or even as actors, as participants in the through the secret services or through the regulatory authorities, different ways of being an actor in it. And what is the role in each of these three target groups or actors, stakeholders, so to say, and what is the ethics behind? Yes, I propose that we start maybe we jump directly to that question of what is the responsibility of these three groups, because this is a whole debate. If I may add myself, a whole debate if social media in the eyes of public views is abused, then the tendency to control social media more than in the past is growing. If the owners lose their interest because they see that it's beyond their control, they may have their own interest to control. So what is the ethics behind these different groups? Can we start maybe with the users? You call for a self-responsibility of the users as a part of the ethics of the users. What is your view on that? Maybe we can also include, already open up, so if you have contributions to that.
No, please. Users.
Yeah.
Yeah, but users, as a journalist, I would say that one of our key guiding principles is do no harm. Do no harm in the sense that if there's something potential damage that could emerge from something you do, think again about it. Verify all possible sources from all possible sources, and bring it out to the public domain if you're convinced that the public good is served, and that the damage that could potentially ensue is redressed by the good that accrues to other people. It's a difficult principle to practice, and it could potentially restrain us in certain ways. The problem is that in the competitive environment we have today, nobody waits to check or cross-check. It just rush into print, rush broadcast, without any kind of any attention at all, without any kind of due diligence, which is usually recommended as a professional essential part of the professional goal or practice. Now, in social media, that of course becomes multiply more dangerous, because you can have in this very city last year, or was it year last 2012 Independence Day, you had a mass exodus of people of the northeastern region, because mass exodus, mass flight. It was 1,000 people left the city overnight. They were all working here, and Bangalore. Because of rumors circulating that they would be marked for special revenge, because there had been riots in the northeastern states in which Muslims were targeted, and there were rumors circulated through SMS saying that the northeastern people in Bangalore are going to be attacked, and this caused this panic, and 1,000 of them left in a day. It was an absolutely unprecedented event, because we all fancy ourselves as free citizens of a free country where we can all move about and feel safe anywhere at all. And this is kind of visible proof that this is not quite, an assurance that everybody can count on. Similarly, a few months back, down in the north, the images circulated from Pakistan of a lynching of two young men and just circulated saying that this is happening in our town. And that led to a major communal riot there between.
And what would be then your recommendation in terms of self-responsibility, not to forward the SMS that you receive?
Yes.
And then if something happens, you would say...
No, there is mischief. You see, the point is that if there is mischief intended, then the potentialities for making it real are much more with this kind of media. But you can also combat it. Now, I think in that case of people from the northeast fleeing from Bangalore, the social media users in Assam, the northeastern states, they started a campaign of their own saying that don't give into panic, don't give into rumor. These are all like, mischief makers at work. So calm down. So there was an effort there to calm tempers. Otherwise, there could have been a ripple effect there. There could have been a backlash there, and that would lead to further kind of spiral of violence. So you can use it for good, you can use it for the bad. But the point is, you got to be quick on the reflexes. The moment you see that the potential mischief coming up, you got to be able to intervene, and intervene in a way that targets the right people and reaches the right kind of endpoint.
And the self-responsibility of users in China, how do you see that?
Actually, social media in China, we can use this in a good way. I agree with my colleague here. For example, when last year the Ya'an and Lushan earthquake in Sichuan, actually the accounts of social media at Ya'an and Lushan rescue was run by the local military quarter, and they broadcast what's taking place during the post-event rescue for 50 consecutive days, and it's actually attracted a huge response. And over the course of its operation, posts were shared thousands of times, and with instant reaction from across China, and it's actually helped a lot for the after the earthquake rescue work. And then, of course, it also play an important role in the Arab Spring, right? Yeah, politically, the fire become bigger and stronger in the Arab Spring. So I do believe that social media is important. It's a very important. And as a media worker, I think we actually use social media. We are also users, and I think the responsibility and accountability is very important for the users, because you have to be responsible for what you say. Of course, you have the freedom of express, but you have to be responsible.
And the regulators, what is the responsibility of the regulators?
For the users, I think that you have the responsibility, I agree. You have also the selections. You have to select the information you're using. Not everything coming to outside, you just press it like it. So you have to select. And also the creation of our own reality. Why? Because everything you are receiving from outside is combined with what you have in your side. The inside, the external and the internal, to combine it to create your own reality. And after that, you can see how to deal with the whole issue. So 3 things: the selection, the responsibility, and the creation of the own reality.
Thank you. Yes, also on the users.
Yeah.
Okay.
So from my point, I think it's, the users is just like the perfect individual is point market. It's a market, free market, secret market individual, just like the perfect is almost. So this is a lot of benefit for the user, of course, but who pay the cost? Who pay the cost? Of course, need cost, the cost the benefit balance. So, from my point is the positive impact, okay, but the negative impact need pay cost. So we need to run a system to measure the cost and the benefit and can governance. If we have no what's the cost and what's the benefit, it's how to measure, how to manage it. It's very hard. So just like the marketing,
Information values
yeah,
measure of anything. So, yeah.
It's an interesting,
Intangible.
That's why.
he's an professor of economics, so he was thinking of economy,
Yeah.
how to measure costs and benefits of interaction in social media. And then you link that with responsibility, because yes, there is no, if I interpret you correctly, there is no perfect market participant,
Yeah.
as in the free market, there is no perfect consumer.
Yeah.
But so where do we need free communication, and where do we need regulation where it's not a perfect?
So
Yeah.
is there any assessment system now to assess the cost and the benefits of social media?
No, I don't think so, because the World Bank and so on are doing studies on the economic value of press freedom and so on. But these are just started to begin with, and they are disputed. We don't have any agreed parameters there. So the best thinking on it is that there's an intangible value, and for instance, the price taker, that the small producer becomes a price maker. From being a price taker, he's able to determine where he gets the best value for his produce and go to that market. Now the next stage of the argument is that the buyers themselves mobilize after that, and they ensure that the artisan goes back to where he was before he became a cell phone user. So it's a dynamic situation, and it all depends on how well the laws exist to protect livelihoods, how well they are enforced. Now, for instance, even in the case of this hate speech being spread by mobile phone or by Facebook or whatever, which leads to actual physical harm being inflicted on people. The dismal, harsh truth is that there's been no accountability for that. We would have expected that there would be some prosecution launched, and the guilty people will be identified and prosecuted. So that becomes an example that you can't do very much this sort of thing and get away with it. But that's not happening. So the law is used to persecute vulnerable, poor people who speak up against against the kind of established order. But it's not used to actually prosecute the wrongdoers. So that's the reality.
No, from the way we look at it, the point of view is now becoming a point of reference. So it's a free market, people are talking, it's not that people who have access to information are actually taking advantage of it and turning around the story for benefit. But I think there are a whole lot of users who are sensible, who have their own discretions, who are commenting.
Sure.
And I think as common people, as users of internet, it also comes from like the ethical or the sides that we hold strong in our society or our work systems. But the point of view is not running to point of reference. I could say anything at this point, but there are 10, 15, at least 50, 100 people who are watching that and who are going to take that seriously and also not keep quiet. They're going to respond, they are going to talk, and I think that becomes a larger audience's stake. So I think we all have discretionary powers.
Yeah, sure.
So
No, once you have access, you will learn the ethics of using it. That's what I believe. So, it's not something that can be taught by.
Let us look at the other two user group or stakeholders, the owners and the regulators. What Fust said, this ethics of the regulators or internet governance is an ethical issue. What is the role, or has to be the role of regulators in order to guarantee equality of access, in order to balance free speech and responsibility? What is the role of them?
Should I say something?
Maybe I look at the audience, if somebody wants to react on that.
The regulatory.
Okay.
Yes, I get the point in the other side, because I heard from you that the dissemination of wrong information, that the government, not the manipulation, they make a dissemination of wrong information. And I think I related it to manipulation of information. And in my head, I think that before going to the government and the individual level, because if you can manage it in the individual level, we can go up to the government, because of the government level is too complicated. First in the individual level, how to deal with this manipulation of information in the individual level. This is what I have in mind about the dissemination of wrong information, because it's began in the small level.
Of course, there is an individual level also, but the question is, what is the role of the regulator in that, and the double role, I mean, as you said, as a regulator, but also as the manipulator itself.
I mean, we have to be clear that there is a need for better regulation. But when governments do that and speak out on their concerns, they always exclude their services of espionage. They always exclude their so-called counter information services. They are never part of the negotiation package because they are out of control of normal, let's say, ministerial government. They are under other auspices. And that is one of my big concern, even bigger than only just the other one, how to regulate the use of certain things. But there is a big process ongoing on the content and on how best to govern these different spaces. But there will be never a perfect solution. I cannot imagine. There might be some principles, there might be some rules, there might be some self-governing endeavors, but I mean, the views on it are so diverse in this international community of countries, of states, that you cannot expect you find there an agreement, and you find even not an agreement to reform the Security Council in the UN. I mean, the whole issue of different forms of governance come in. So I think sometimes we maybe overestimate the capabilities to find solutions, but the endeavors are there, but the issues are so far apart on how best to do it that sometimes you need other vehicles to come in. For example, now the child protection issue, the youth protection issue, and other security issues, cyber security, a big concern. That, but again, if I open a bracket, when you listen to the cyber security specialists, I mean, the war games now going on in behind the doors of those specialists, that is for me the most threatening thing. Because when you listen to those people, and I had the opportunity on different continents to listen to those specialists, what are they doing? And what they are doing, I mean, if people would know what these people are doing, they would not understand anymore at all what's going on. Because though I just mention it, as there are vectors of developments we cannot see or we cannot assess properly as normal citizens, but they are there. There are specialists working on it, and the whole science of cyber warfare is extremely quickly developing, and is increasingly, let's say, active in different segments. But it's also very easy to accuse each other and to, change sides and not sides.
Yeah, for cybersecurity, different countries have their different code of conduct. So it's very hard for them to get any agreement for that. And I think media's function in a society is provide information. And every citizens, they have the right to access to this information, and they will make their own decision and their own judgment based on their wisdom.
I think that's very important. They give you at the lower end another example that strikes me. And I found it extremely interesting. In Ghana, in Africa, I met people and an organization of people, citizens. They asked a software company to develop for them a monitoring board about their main hospital in the city. And no, the hospital was, the public has a right, they pretended, to know, are the doctors there, are the services delivered, are the medicaments there, are people working on time, and if not, they intervene in parliament or in government. And it's a very powerful tool just to monitor. Sorry?
But how about the privacy?
Yeah, that's an issue. Yeah. Let me
That's clear, but
give myself the floor, not as a moderator, but as a participant. I think behind this discussion, one concern is that we should also openly talk about the power behind all these social media. Because the impression, I think, in the broad public is this is a free space out of any power interests where we share ideas and can be active. And in fact, there is no power-free space on earth. And to be aware of that would be a part of the ethics. Means how to responsibly use the power. Each citizen has a little power, but then there is a whole power game behind, and cyber war is one which is not very visible, very covered. But what comes now more and more on the surface is, for example, the whole question of the owners. As I said, they are not only the users and the regulators, they are the owners, like the Facebooks and the Googles. Who owns and who influences with what is the interest behind it? I take an example. Recently, about a month ago, we could read in the newspaper an interesting article about social media and a big company, I can call it here because it was public in the media, Nestle. Nestle had a serious case a year ago with Greenpeace attacking them on a product, and they reacted very unprofessional. And they learned the lesson very quickly, and within a year, they established a whole department with 15 specialists sitting in Geneva, watching minute by minute the social media. And they have, and I've seen a picture, they have 15 monitors in one room, and each product of Nestle is watched second by second. What is reported about a Nestle product somewhere in the world in the social media. And then they have green, yellow, and red light. If there is a hype of maybe 500 times mentioned a product negatively, they interact. And if it's red, they have a big media campaign in the social media. So the social media themselves are used by these companies now as their main marketing tool. So this is not bad, not good, maybe it's just a reality. And it shows that it's not a powerless game. It's somewhere in the midst of a normal market. And to include that in the reflection, and the other one is related to cyber issues, is the whole question now of control of social media, using data from social media for the counter information and security departments. And this is very serious because now we could read that even the value of the social media in terms of economic value starts to drop down, and key companies in the US start to go down because people become very afraid of using it because they know now that you never know where there's a chip in my cable. There was a list of technologies published last week of technological products where even when you buy a laptop, you cannot be sure that in the cable there is a chip or an information possibility for the Secret Service. The list was published of products that are produced with this kind of information in it. So this is threatening, and at the same time it's not against social media, on the contrary, but it makes people, I think, more and more concerned about it.
Yes.
Now, is it part of this, of the ethics of using social media? You have already, but yes.
I just have a perspective of, we're really talking about making equality amongst globally, and when we talk about the populace, and perhaps I'm talking from an Indian perspective, my understanding is probably for a BRIC perspective also it will hold true. When we talk inequality, social media is clearly one of the factors which has made us more equal than anything else. It's the greatest equalizer that we found in the recent times. And given that whilst privacy and cybersecurity are huge issues and they need to be countered at a national and a security and a UN level, I think the common man who has been facing inequalities at that level, it really hasn't come down to privacy as an issue. Because right now, I think for them the gains of the social media far outweigh the negatives of it. So I think the Arab Spring or what's happening in the Indian context or any of our, a lot of political views. So earlier the political mobility would come only through the campaigns which would be driven completely by the political parties. Now I think a lot of citizens across different geographies are able to voice themselves, and therefore at this point in time I would think the social media is much more of an equalizer, and the downfalls of it was at an academic and a government level we definitely need to look into privacy and security issues. It's much more of a neutralizer and a very positive effect.
Thank you very much. You also raise a hand. Speak louder.
We don't have any authority, any power to control these technologies. As a result, all people, suppose email, we use email, and the servers are with the companies. We use a lot of other things. Servers are with the Google or whatever it is, right? They have the authority, they have the power to control other countries, especially, actually, luckily, most of the people cannot use this technology. The reason is language. Here, English speaking people, they can use. I am from Sri Lanka. I travel by three-wheelers. No three-wheelers so far. I didn't find a single three-wheeler driver who can read English address. For me, it is good because these companies cannot use their for their activities all these people, right? Because I read many things related to the malpractices of the social media. Maybe this Google and the leader of the Google, what he did in Egypt. I was really shocked to see these things. Therefore, I feel that I do not know whether there is any possibility for us to control this media, but anyway, in the long run, I feel there must be a mechanism. We will have a base, as you said, in the cyber war. We can't live. We can have a peaceful life. Because it interferes with all activity very bad. There is the negative side. On the other hand, the positive sides also. Yeah. Positive sides are always brought on by the negative, creating a lot of havoc and the misery.
Thank you. Yes.
I want to ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
Why not we set up a social media citizen community or society independent? They, social citizen government by themselves. I ask why not? Why not we set up virtual society?
You mean to organize in a
Yeah, they govern by themselves. They are communities.
governing body for the
Just
social
like
media
the free
themselves,
access.
not a yes.
Why not?
So
My question is, for example, can media actually regulate themselves?
that's the question.
British media, the BBC, actually
No.
independent. Yeah, they cannot regulate themselves.
Well, they have that
So
big.
may I ask before you? Would your answer be to that question rather
But
difficult for the social media to regulate themselves?
Regulate themselves.
I think the social media citizen, the members become a community. Maybe they can volunteer,
Set up a body by themselves.
the board, the member board. I just ask, I don't know. But
The moment you organize something, then it's easy to
It's easy to.
attack or work along or work aside. But I think it's a self, at some point, the fears of all we're discussing is the reality. But it's a self, if left free. We have this whole control, power. Only if we have control and if we have power, we are able to regulate. But I think social media is going to throw the other dimension also of self-regulation at some point, because that's the sunny side to the whole story. But it depends on like the language, access to language, and more users. So all of that is set aside. I think social media has a self-regulatory process because the people all are not. Everybody has their views, and it's going to come out. And people are going to. The uprising needed the whole exodus of the Northeast. The counteract action for that was through social media. We got the entire exodus to be regulated or stopped, but through
Came back as a
social
big
media.
star.
The sunny side of it is always something we have to hold strong.
Yes.
Well, I could imagine that there are possibilities, opportunities, and we just heard one in many parts of countries or societies to use the local language for their communication, and the use of social media has a big impact on self-regulation and the way people behave on the net.
There is
Or in my country, it is even saying nobody understands Swiss German, so it's the best to get protected against the American or other secret services.
Indigenous language.
Use indigenous languages, not common languages. But the proximity of concerns, I think, is something we underestimate as the reuniting force, where you communicate, where you interact with those social media. Even so that the things go out in space, but the place, the concept of place, will become even more important. And there, the strengths of the social media are really, beside the local medias, it's the proximity of concerns, but also the proximity of people of the community, where they will have a big influence and where there is a good self-regulating capacity.
Thank you very much.
I have a question, sir. Social media is all about speed. So what happens if a citizen, for example, what happens if a citizen in Spain complains on Twitter and no one in the time zone is there to respond on time? And why don't we organize the channels provided in an effective manner? Why can't we implement a global social media policy? We have one, but why it has not been implemented in an effective way? And how are we going to address social media and equal accessibility to information in rural areas? Maybe in terms of villages and other things. How are we going to address that?
The point you also Global Council of Social Media Users. It's easy to talk about, but it's rather difficult in practice. We have this internet governance process of domain names and so on, which is it's usually a slow process and invariably it tests our patience. And social media users, by their nature being impatient people, are not likely to get the pace of change that they desire. As for the thing about rural areas, of course, it's the driver of social media there is the cell phone. The cell phone is the basic implement through which the media is reaching the rural areas, and you have constraints there for networking, and so that importance of building up the infrastructure cannot possibly be overemphasized. We need to really invest heavily into that rural infrastructure, communications infrastructure. With whatever exists, there's a lot of creative use being made. I wonder if you're aware of this facility called the CGNet Swar. CGNet Swar, which works in Chhattisgarh. It's a social media, it's a cell phone-based social media network whereby people in the most isolated hamlet, it's a tribal area, densely forested area and dispersed population. And it's also mining intensive area, so there are a lot of concerns about human rights and so on there. Now, these people with the cell phone, they can call in at a number and leave a missed call, and they will of course get a call back, so they don't have to spend any money there. They get a call back, and they can give the information, and it goes into a bank of information, and it's checked, moderated, verified, and they speak in their local tribal dialect, which is not comprehensible outside that narrow territory. It is checked, moderated, verified, and translated into Hindi and put out, and also posted on the web. So you have, anybody anywhere in the country can call into that number and get a menu of the stories on offer, and they can punch a key and get that day's news broadcast. Now this is a very innovative use of, now it's creating a lot of security anxieties there, because the police are suddenly aware of being, being watched, because otherwise the police there can go out and do a security operation saying that we are fighting. There's a Maoist insurgency in some of the areas, so the police go out and they do a security operation. People die and they'll say dreaded Maoist insurgents killed, but that may not be the full story. So these guys actually call in and give the real story, and the police are very kind of upset by it. The civil administration thinks it's a very valuable resource, because they say, we're spending so much money on development, the rural employment and tribal areas development and so on, and we just don't know where it's reaching and whether it's actually achieving its objectives. And these kind of feedbacks that you get from the local people, they give you a valuable feedback. So they evaluate, the security people detest it. So there's an interesting kind of polarity coming up there.
Yeah, and also the US NSA is now under great pressure for reform.
Yeah.
Yes, we are coming almost to an end in 4 minutes. I try to formulate 4 recommendations that I try to filter out of what you all said. And of course we have the rapporteur, where is he sitting? You are the rapporteurs, so all what you said will be covered in the report and will be filed, and then we will have a report that you can access at the end. I think to use the social media, or to support the use of social media as a great equalizer, you said it's a great equalizer, would be the positive message I heard from quite a number of you. The positive message should be maybe at the beginning. The second would be to increase access of marginalized groups to social media, which was a message especially from you, but also from others. The third would be to develop ethics of social media, especially addressing the responsibility of users, of owners, of regulators, of social media, which was mentioned by you, but then taken up by others. And the fourth to further explore the possibilities of regulatory and self-regulatory mechanisms. As you mentioned, the self-regulatory mechanisms, you show the hesitance, is it possible that the users, or there is a self-regulatory mechanism in using social media? So there are a lot of questions we have not yet solved in that respect. Maybe, would you agree with, it's not complete, of course, it's just improving access, yeah, I think that should be
Neglected areas and affordability of access.
and the affordability, yes, that's very important. Improving access
Investment in infrastructure.
and in affordability of access to social media. I think that should be included in the first point that I mentioned. Is that correct?
Yeah, what's the first?
To support the use of social media, use more precisely in accessibility and affordability of social media.
Of neglected communities, excluded communities.
Are there other points that you would like to put in this, so to say, recommendations? Yes?
Yes. Who is the government? This is my first question in the game. This is why I want to say that government in Africa sometimes is just a group of persons, and they dissimulate. I really agree with Professor Walter Fust said, dissemination of wrong information or manipulation of the information. So we need to empower the community for the manipulation, how to manage the information, the social media like this. Because in Africa, it's really a big problem because people think that all the comments in the television or video is the reality, and then they treat the people to use it. So how to empower the community to manage manipulation of the information.
Thank you. I think that's an important part for the fourth point I mentioned on regulatory, self-regulatory mechanisms, which has to include this empowerment of unified and of the community. Okay, thank you so much for your active participation, and a special thank to the panelists for your very valuable So we have the lunch where we had it before, and we are back in the plenary auditorium at 1:30, so in an hour. In the big auditorium, as yesterday.